On today's show, Rockets offseason contract negotiations with Amen Thompson, Tari Eason, and Fred VanVleet, and how it could shape the future of the franchise. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. On today's show, we're going to be talking contracts for the Rockets. 3 names that are in line to receive new deals this offseason. Well, 2 names that are in line to receive either extensions or brand new contracts this offseason. And then 1 name that is rumored to maybe be trying to restructure his deal, and that's Fred VanVleet. So we'll talk about Fred and the possibility of his new deal a little bit later on. We'll talk about Tari in the middle of the show. We'll talk about Amen Thompson here at the top in just a second. I figured I'd go in like order of importance. So if that being the case, maybe I should start with Fred. No, I'm kidding. So these 3 guys, possible new contracts on the horizon. Amen Thompson with his rookie max extension. Tari Eason hitting restricted free agency since he didn't come to terms on a contract last summer with the Rockets like Jabari did when they were negotiating his rookie extension. And then Fred VanVleet going into the final year of his 2-year deal that he signed, where he's got a player option on this year, and there's been reporting and rumors he may restructure that. So let's start with Amen Thompson. Amen in line for his rookie extension. And this is the one that is going to be the most impactful, I guess, across the board, because as great and as amazing as Amen Thompson has been, as awesome as he's been in his first 3 years in the NBA, he's an elite defender. He's a great downhill presence. He's a walking Swiss Army knife on the basketball court. He's a great secondary creator. Good finisher around the rim. He's shown development with his touch around the basket, getting further away from the basket, that little kind of midi floater package that he's working on. Still can't shoot from beyond the arc. And so there's still some glaring weaknesses in his game, right? His handle is not as good as it needs to be a full-time ball handler at the NBA level. And there's still some other things that you could point out too, right? But overall, Amen Thompson is a like borderline all-star NBA talent, right? Not even borderline. Like he's an all-star NBA talent. He is. Anybody that is an all-NBA caliber defender, like a first-team all-NBA caliber defender, and can average what he has averaged this past season, doing, what was it? Just off the dome, 18, 8, and 5 this past season on good efficiency. Again, struggling to shoot from downtown, and that's the next step that Amen has to take in his game to really move forward in the echelon of NBA competition. But you start looking at his possible deals, and this is where, as much grief as I've given Rafael Stone over the years, whether it's moves at the margins or this past season, not making a deal for a point guard after Fred VanVleet got hurt. I will say one area that you give the benefit of the doubt to Rafael Stone on is contract negotiations. He has done a really stellar job negotiating contracts for this Rockets team. At case in point, a couple summers ago when Alperen Sengun was up for his rookie scale max, right? I mean, Stone played the waiting game, and he got Alperen Sengun on a steal of a deal, right? 5 for $180 or whatever it was. Incredibly team-friendly contract for a guy that everybody thought was going to be a lock for a rookie max. And if this Rockets team had been, a worse team, if they had been, I don't know, the Magic or the Hornets or, the Blazers or somebody, I'm naming a bunch of orgs that I'm not trying to throw strays at these orgs, honestly. I'm just saying, I guess if they had felt like they didn't have leverage or something, or if maybe they just didn't have great negotiators, but all those organizations right through rookie maxes at their star players. And I go back to I listed those orgs. I don't even think I'm trying to think Charlotte and Portland. I'm really going just off I'm going off Paolo mainly in my head, but there's also Jalen. So there's a bunch of other guys. Point is, I'm digressing here. Point is, Rockets did a really good job with managing Alperen Sengun's deal, right? Getting him on a good team-friendly deal was important to preserve financial flexibility, roster flexibility moving forward, and it makes him a great trade piece if the Rockets ultimately decide that they want to move on from Alperen Sengun and use him as the cornerstone of a Giannis deal or something else to that effect, right? Having a two-time All-Star on a team-friendly contract is huge. So you pull that, extrapolate that and apply it to the Amen Thompson contract negotiations, right? I think that the Rockets can't max Amen Thompson. Right now, Amen Thompson is not worthy of a max contract at the NBA level. And you could make an argument that his contract should probably be something in line with Alperen Sengun's contract, although because of his ability on the defensive end, you think it's probably going to be higher than Sengun's. He's a more versatile player at the end of the day than Sengun probably is, just as far as being able to plug and play in certain dynamics. Right now, he's still limited because of the lack of shooting. But I think you start looking at a contract for Amen Thompson around the $200 million range, right? 5 years, $200 million. And if you can get him somewhere in that range, right? Either just south of 200 or just north of 200, like 190 to 210 is like your negotiating range, right? 10 million either direction. If you can get him somewhere in that sweet spot, right? Because a true rookie max, right? So like the number that Victor Wembanyama is looking at is 5 years, 252 million. So that being the case, you get him on a fraction of that deal, right? So $50 million or potentially more less over the course of that contract. That's a pretty decent outcome for Amen Thompson. But I will say, there's an analog here, and I'm very curious to see what direction the organization goes, because in the past, right, we've seen Stone do it a couple different ways. We saw him drag out the Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green contracts until like the final day of the offseason when those contracts could officially be signed. And then we saw the Jabari Smith Jr. negotiations take place, and Jabari signed his contract almost instantaneously, right? So I don't know which direction this one's going to go with him in, whether it's going to be like hey, we really want to keep you, we're going to get you signed ASAP right away, or if this is going to be one that draws out a little bit throughout the summer. And I say that because there is an analog here, and I'm very curious to see which team breaks first, in that Amen Thompson and Ausar Thompson are literally the same player. They're twins, right? Now, obviously, they're not really the same player, technically. But I'm very curious to see which of these two teams, the Rockets or the Pistons, which one of them signs their twin first. And does the signing of the first twin impact the rates, the negotiations, the deals, whatever, for the second twin? I think that on paper, right, Amen is going to be the one that gets paid more. Probably he's the one that's expected to do more and has a significantly bigger offensive role. And I think universally is viewed as the better twin. I think I would give Ausar the edge defensively right now, in part just because Amen Thompson has a much bigger role offensively for this Rockets team. And so, if you're going to give Amen, 5 years, 200 million, what does Ausar clock in at, right? Does Ausar clock in at 5 years, 170, 180, 150? Like where do the Pistons value him? And so I do wonder how much that will play a role in negotiating Amen's contract. Because if Ausar gets a contract and he's making 5 years, 150, do the Rockets then turn around and think we can offer Amen 5 years, 175, 5 years, 180, right? Somewhere more in line with the Alperen Sengun contract. So at the end of the day, I mean, I do trust Rafael Stone to do his due diligence and to negotiate a good quality contract for Amen Thompson, and one that is very favorable for the Rockets. The number one thing is just you can't max Amen Thompson. If he can't shoot the ball, that is a glaring flaw, a glaring weakness. And at that point, you don't have much negotiating leverage, because that is a pretty significant Achilles heel to have as a player, is not being able to shoot the ball. Yes, he does everything else at a very elite level, very high level, right? And he's an all-star caliber talent without being able to shoot the basketball. And it's not a necessity, right? However, for the Rockets with Amen and with Alperen not being able to shoot, one of them needs to be able to develop a shot. And to this point, neither of them have done it. Now, if Amen had been able to develop an outside shot before it came time for his rookie scale contract extension discussion, then maybe he'd be getting the full max. But he's actually, in fact, this past season, he actually showed regression on his three ball, right? And that's the concerning part, is he got worse this past season shooting the three ball. At least it felt like he got worse shooting the three ball. I don't even have the percentages up in front. I could have the percentages up in front of me. I do have them up in front of me. He did get worse shooting the three ball. So I was just going off like the vibes, not like the numbers, and the vibes match, like the eye test matches what the actual numbers are. He shot 27.5% his second year. He shot 21.6% this past year. On more attempts, 1.3 attempts his sophomore season, 1.5 attempts his junior campaign this past year. So ultimately, I think it's going to settle in somewhere around 5 years, $200 million for Amen Thompson. But I'm curious your thoughts on an Amen Thompson contract. Do you think 5 years, $200 million is too much for Amen Thompson? Is it not enough? Where would you like to see the Rockets settle in on a deal for Amen Thompson? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Coming up, we'll talk about Tari Eason and his RFA negotiations with the Rockets. How much is too much to keep Tari Eason? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. If you've got a sweet tooth like I do, you know how tough it is to find that perfect treat without all the sugar. That's why the Confetti Craze 5 Hour Energy shot brings that nostalgic flavor back in a whole new way. This is the classic taste that you remember, but with a tasty caffeine boost and zero sugar. It's a quick, easy way to satisfy that sweet tooth craving while keeping things simple and on the go. Look, birthday cake is great, but you can't just be snacking on birthday cake all day, or birthday cake flavored ice cream, other birthday cake flavored things. This is a great alternative. Zero sugar, packed in a tiny little easy to go container. And look, when you need a boost of energy, whether you're trying to get through your workday or errands, or maybe you just have a long night ahead of you out hanging out with friends or whatever, and you want to make sure that you're not the first one to crash, take a 5 Hour Energy. The Funfetti flavor is back on 5hourenergy.com or Amazon. Crack open Confetti Craze 5 Hour Energy shot today. Today's show is also brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position that you have to fill still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need the right hire. This is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you are looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping that the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Get this show, get Locked On Rockets ad-free with our Everydayer Club, plus access to our members-only Discord where you can chat with other Rockets fans. Click the link in the episode description to learn more. All right, let's talk a little Tari Eason here with his deal. And, it was a bit of a bummer last offseason that the Rockets couldn't come to terms on a deal with Tari Eason. Tari's a fan favorite, right? And he plays hard. He fights every possession that he's out there, leaves it all on the floor. He's a guy that you love to cheer for. And honestly, it felt like a major bummer in the middle of the season when he was at one point like the second best three-point shooter in the entire NBA, because he thought, man, all right, well, there's no way that they can keep him now because he's shooting the lights out of the ball. He's a high-level defender, good size, good rebounder. Like, he's the exact type of player you want in that 3-and-D role, because he's shooting the lights out of the basketball. And then he had that horrid month of March, right? 3% from downtown for the entire month or something ridiculous like that. And that like single-handedly tanked his negotiating power this offseason. I think that ultimately now Tari's probably going to be in line for something similar to what he was probably being offered last offseason, which means that the Rockets are likely going to be able to retain him on a relatively, I'm not going to call it team-friendly deal, but they're not going to have to, I don't think they're going to have to overpay to keep Tari Eason. You look at the teams this offseason with actual spending power, teams like the Wizards, the Clippers, the Bulls, Lakers, Jazz, and Nets. And some of those teams might like Tari's been linked to the Lakers, I believe. I think there was a report that he was linked to the Bulls at one point too. And so some of those teams might walk by and try to throw some money at Tari Eason, but some of those teams also need to make bigger swings than Tari Eason, right? Like the Nets are in desperate need of some support. The Nets need like a star or two, right? The Wizards could be an interesting one because if the Wizards are hell bent on competing next season with Trae Young and AD, and they want like the right pieces around those guys to complement the rest of their young core, the Wizards could be an interesting one. Clippers depends on what they do with Kawhi, right? Are they trying to win? Are they trying to bottom out? That'll dictate like where and how they spend their money. Bulls is an interesting one, although they're kind of, middling in the East. So it is what it is. Lakers, another interesting one, although they've got to figure out like whether they're going to like tear down the LeBron James era, if they're going to move on for like whatever happens there. And then the Jazz, who want to be like pseudo competitive, I guess, with Lowry Markkanen and Triple J and like whatever they've got going on up in Utah. Who cares about Utah anyways? Whatever. Point is, there are plenty of teams that have money to target Tari Eason this offseason. I don't know that any of them are going to truly overpay for his services. Like I can't really imagine any of these teams going north of 25, 30 million and trying to essentially price the Rockets out of Tari Eason this offseason. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe one of these teams is desperate for a 3-and-D wing they view Tari as a starting caliber 3-and-D wing, and they're ready to like throw the bag at him, right? 4 years, $120 million, $30 million a season. And the Rockets take one look at that and they're like, we don't really want to match that. I don't think that'll be the case. I'm imagining Tari's contract is probably going to slot in somewhere around $20 million a season. You look at, and shout out to diehard Rockets fan and expert capologist, David Wiener, Beam a Thug on Twitter, who broke down what his 5-year offer to Tari Eason looked like. And it roughly comes out to 5 years, $100 million. So about $20 million a year, give or take. And I think that's fair value for Tari. Somewhere in that 18 to 22 million a year range is the right value for Tari Eason. Because then you start looking at it from this perspective. A full non-taxpayer MLE this offseason would be 4 years, $65 million. And Tari is going to get a bunch of those offers, right? Now, it doesn't matter because the Rockets, since he's a restricted free agent, they can match whatever offer comes his way. Now, the question then becomes, okay, well, if full non-tax MLE offers 4 years, $65 million, and if there are teams out there that have cap space that are then potentially willing to offer him 4 years, 80, 4 years, 85, 4 years, 90, 4 years, 100, like at what point, where's the breaking point in there, right? Because you have to be able to beat the non-tax MLE offer of 4 years, $65 million. And you still need to find a way to beat the middle tier offers from another team of like 4 years, 80 million, give or take. And that's where the extra year comes in, right? The Rockets being able to tack on that 5th year is really beneficial. And for Tari, even if it comes in the way of a team option, right? Getting a 5th year, getting the chance for that guaranteed money over the lifetime of the contract is better than just not having it whatsoever. Especially because even if the Rockets don't actually even want him on the team by that 5th year, they could pick up the team option and trade him, and he still gets 20 some odd million, whatever's on that deal, right? Whatever's that 5th year salary range. So looking again at all those teams that have spending power, I think the biggest threats on that list would be the Wizards, the Lakers probably, and actually the Hawks are another interesting one because they could have up to 36 million depending on team option decisions, or as little as 27 million. And so they have the smallest amount of spending power, but Tari would fit in perfectly with what Atlanta's trying to build over there. And so that becomes a little bit of a concern. So you start playing, this little cat and mouse game with all these other teams waiting to see what they're doing this offseason. And you can rest assured, for a guy that bet on himself last offseason and turned down the offers that the Rockets were throwing his way, Tari and his camp are absolutely going to explore all their options this offseason, in large part because he wants a bigger role. He said it at the beginning of the season. Tari wants to be a starter. He wants a bigger role. He wants more responsibility. And at least under this current iteration of the Rockets, that's not going to happen, right? Tari is not going to be a starter on this team for the foreseeable future, unless they do a major roster shakeup, unless they make some moves and consolidate some pieces or move some guys around. Tari's not going to be in the starting lineup. Your de facto starting lineup next year is likely Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Jabari, KD, and Sengun. Assuming no other changes, right? That's going to be your starting lineup. Tari's not going to break into the starting lineup over any of those 5 guys. And so I could see a starting role for one of these other organizations being a more enticing opportunity for him and exploring those options, even if it means going to the Wizards or to the Bulls or something like that. Now, again, restricted free agency. He doesn't really have a say in it. If Chicago wants to offer him 4 years, $20 million to come to Chicago, then he can accept it and the Rockets have a chance to match it, right? And I feel like the Rockets at this point will match anything on Tari Eason's contract up to probably about, I think about $23 million a year is where it starts to get a little sketch, right? Anything north of $23 million a season, you're starting to break, you're going north of Jabari contract money. And at that point, you go north of that, that starts to get really hard to stomach if he's not one of your 5 starters, right? Not one of your main guys, main contributors. Now, yeah, you view him as maybe like your 6th man, your most important player off the bench, however you want to view it. But it starts to get a little dicey north of that. So for Tari, the ideal range would be something in that 5-year, $100 million range would be absolutely fantastic. Somewhere around $20 million average annual value. And you could get creative with like the structuring of it too, if you wanted to, where you could have it like, pardon me. You could have it drop in, you could structure it to where the contract like drops in year 2 to help alleviate some of the stress of the Amen Thompson contract kicking in and the Kevin Durant contracts kicking in, like all this other stuff going on. So there's some creativity in the structuring of the deal that you could have, but ultimately I think I'm settling in on somewhere around 5 years, $100 million feels like the right number for Tari Eason. And it'll be interesting to see if any of these other teams that we mentioned that have spending power this offseason, if they go beyond that threshold in order to try and procure his services from the Rockets. And what are the Rockets? What is their pain tolerance, right? What are they willing to max, or what are they willing to match? I should say, will they go up to $25 million a year to keep Tari Eason? Because you could always just keep him and then you could just deal him later, right? Even if a team overpays to try and get him, if a team wants to offer him 25 or 27 million a year, up to 30 million, maybe, do you just match that contract and then figure out a trade destination for him later if it's too expensive of a price point, or do you let him walk for nothing? That's the really hard dilemma here, and that's the really tricky thing about restricted free agency for the Rockets. So I'm curious your thoughts. What do you want to see the Rockets do with Tari Eason this offseason? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Give me your contract suggestions in the YouTube comments. Coming up, we will talk about Fred VanVleet and the possibility of him renegotiating his existing contract this offseason, how that could work for the Rockets moving forward. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like playoff basketball live. The intensity, the crowd, the rivalries. It's completely different experience when you're in the building. The NBA playoffs are where unforgettable moments happen, and being there in person just hits different. Game Time makes it incredibly easy to find tickets, even for those hard to get playoff games, in just a few taps. And with the Game Time guarantee, you know you're getting 100% authentic tickets on time at the best possible price. Game Time is awesome for so many different reasons. You can have your tickets locked in within a couple of minutes. My favorite part about using Game Time, fully transparent from start to finish. The price you see when you go to select your tickets, that's the price you're going to pay at the end. They don't hit you with like the digital handling fees and the service charges and the convenience fees and all that mess at the end of the checkout process. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Today's show is also brought to you by Kalshi. Look, playoffs are here, and it is the most electric time in all of basketball. On Kalshi, you can trade every single playoff game, every series, the conference finals, and even the championship. Right now, you can take a look at the Spurs Thunder series. The Spurs trading at just 33% to win game one. That means you put down $100 on the Spurs, trading at 33%. You have a chance at a $289 payout. Or conversely, if you want a bit of a safer trade to make, you can put $100 down on the Oklahoma City Thunder, trading at 67%, and you have a chance at a $141 payout. So you've got that to take a look at. You can take a look at the championship. So much action to get into on Kalshi. You're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position at any time. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. That's Kalshi. Kalshi. Trade on anything, 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's talk a little Fred VanVleet here, because for the Amen's going to get a new contract this offseason. Tari is probably going to get a new contract this offseason. Fred is the unique one where he doesn't need a new contract this offseason, and he's got the player option. He could just pick that up, and the Rockets could just kick the can down the road and figure out his contract situation next summer. Now, there was some reporting that suggested that the Rockets may be looking at renegotiating Fred's deal, right, and doing something like a 2-year, $40 million contract. So he would take a $5 million pay cut this upcoming season for the long-term guarantee of having another year under his belt on the roster, another like 1+1 deal, essentially. On the surface, sounds good. Pay Fred a little bit less this next season, have a little bit more financial flexibility with him moving forward. The number one thing that the Rockets cannot do if they do that deal with Fred VanVleet, if they decide to renegotiate his current contract, they have to get Fred to waive his early bird, no trade clause or whatever the hell it's called. The thing that he got this past offseason. When you sign the 1+1 deal, you get the implied no trade clause. Which is why Fred couldn't be included in any trade discussions, trade negotiations, whatever this offseason, because he would have had to give his blessing to the Rockets to be traded, right? Because he had an implied no trade clause. Now, that clause can be waived upon signing of the contract. The Rockets just have to ask Fred to waive that right at the time of signing the deal. So if a new contract is on the table for Fred VanVleet, the Rockets need to have him waive that right, because you cannot give Fred another 1+1 deal where you are hamstrung again and don't have the ability to move him. Because the fact that the Rockets have now, well, let me put it, you see what the Cavaliers are doing right now with James Harden, right? James Harden is, and he said, look, he's put up some stinkers in the playoffs, right? But Cavs also don't make it to the conference finals without what James did in games 3 and 4 of this Cavs Pistons series, right? James has been awesome in some of those games, and he's a table setter, he's a facilitator, he sets up the team, he does everything he needs to do for that team. Takes a lot of pressure off Donovan Mitchell, puts the bigs, Allen, Mobley, in position to be successful. And there was a point when the Clippers were looking at trading James this past season that they reached out to the Rockets, and the Rockets weren't interested again in James Harden. Now, I understood it the first time. I understood not being interested in James Harden the first go around when they signed Fred. Fred was more of a malleable player. You could play him on ball, off ball. He made sense for the culture that Ime wanted to establish. That's not really James's whole motif, right? He's not a vocal leader like that. He's more of a quiet, soft-spoken guy. So I understood it. But to basically say no to James Harden a second time when this team desperately needed a point guard this season. Now, part of that is because Rockets didn't have a way financially to get to James Harden's salary level without including Alperen and Sengun in a trade, because they just didn't have enough movable salary this season. And in large part because they couldn't deal Fred. Now, unfortunately, there's also feels like there's a weird, like I've seen people like equate it to like a weird, like Bill O'Brien, Jack Easterby Texans kind of thing going on with like Ime Udoka and Rafael Stone and Fred VanVleet and like that weird like love triangle trifecta kind of deal. It is a little strange, but at the same time, so I mean, it might not even matter if Fred can be traded, right? Because the org might not ever envision trading Fred VanVleet because they value him too much. He's too important to the fabric of this team or something along those lines. That being said, though, you should still have the option. And that's the thing is removing that option, taking away your optionality with some of these players, some of these contracts, the way that the Rockets kind of backed themselves into a corner last summer anyways, with being pressed up against the second apron and not having any wiggle room to make moves at the margins to alleviate the Fred VanVleet injury in the first place. That's where you don't want to be again this next season. You don't want to be stuck with the inability to make adjustments on the fly. And so if the Rockets renegotiate Fred's deal, I think that if the Rockets renegotiate Fred's deal, I think there's some benefits. Obviously, just paying him a little bit less is good. Having the flexibility on the contract is good. If it's another player option, though, then that gives Fred what feels like a little bit too much power over the org. So honestly, I'm at the point where I'd rather see the Rockets not re-up Fred's deal, right? Just let him play out this next deal, let him pick up the player option and see where things land at the end of this upcoming season. Because the other part of it, this equation too, is what do you do with Reed Shepherd? I get there's a whole subsection of Rockets fans that don't believe in Reed, that think he's a bust, that are pissed off that they passed on Steph Castle. I get that. Steph Castle's a baller, and he looks awesome right now. And the Spurs have done wonders working on him with his shot. It kind of makes you wonder what the Rockets coaching staff is doing as far as training up guys. Because why is Steph Castle already a better shooter than Amen Thompson? Like, are the Spurs just that much better at developing young talent, about turning non-shooters into shooters? They did it with Kawhi. They're doing it again with Steph Castle. Would Amen Thompson already be a top 10 player if he played in San Antonio instead of Houston? Who knows, right? Because he can't shoot, and Steph Castle can all of a sudden. So that's a very valid question to ask yourself. But how does Reed continue to grow and develop, right? You're not going to have minutes for Reed if Fred's eating up 30 to 35 minutes a night. Like, you've got to have an exit ramp on the runway to be able to, down the line, feasibly like scale Reed Shepherd up and scale Fred VanVleet down. And what's funny is that might actually happen this next season. And so my thing is, I don't want to see them jump the gun on extending Fred, whether it's another short little 1+1 deal or even a longer term deal, because they've got their future replacement for Fred waiting in the wings. And so factoring that in and trying to understand where all these guys are going to, like, how the contract discussions then impact the future of this team, right? Be it spending power, roster flexibility, developmental runtime for some of these young guys. It's all a very intricate balance. At this point, though, Amen for $200 million, Tari for $100 million. Keep Fred where he's at. Just let Fred pick up his contract option, and you can revisit it next offseason. I really can't come up with a single. I mean, there's maybe a couple reasons why renegotiating would make sense, but ultimately, I think it's better for overall flexibility. And then if a trade pops up this season that you really like, that you really want to get in on, guess what? You've got a $25 million expiring contract in Fred VanVleet that you can send out the door. And that's it. As far as trade talks are concerned, a $25 million expiring has a lot of trade value. It's not, probably not on par with like a first round pick or something, but it has some intrinsic value in and of itself that you don't want to just forego just because, unless there's a legitimate reason why you need to renegotiate Fred's deal. If saving that money will allow you to make a subsequent move, or if saving that $5 million on Fred's contract this season is the difference between losing and keeping Tari Eason, then fine, renegotiate it if you need to. But if there's no legitimate, tangible reason to do it and to renegotiate Fred's contract this offseason, I'd say don't do it. Keep your options open and keep that trade chip at your disposal for this upcoming season, especially this upcoming trade deadline, because look at what the Cavs are doing now, man. They traded for James Harden middle of the season, and they have a shot at the finals now. That could have been the Rockets if they did not hamstring themselves and put themselves in a position where they couldn't make any moves this past year to try and rectify the Fred VanVleet situation. Imagine if Fred VanVleet hadn't been hurt. Or sorry, not hurt. Imagine if Fred VanVleet hadn't been untradeable because of the no trade clause. Imagine if the Rockets had been able to trade Fred VanVleet and DFS, two busted players that weren't doing anything for them this season, and a couple picks, or Fred, DFS, or Fred and Tari or something like that. Imagine the deal that they could have made to get James Harden back in Houston and actually have a point guard, a floor general, and they could have had James and KD and Sengun and Amen and Jabari, and like that would have been an insane team to watch. So I leave that with you. That's where we're going to wrap up today's episode. I'm curious your thoughts on all the contract discussion. What do you want to see happen with Fred? What do you want to see happen with Tari? What do you want to see happen with Amen? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.